There is a story that reaches back to the late 19th century, long before we became known for our generosity or compassion. It begins with my great 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 grandfather. He was a royal nobleman with two wives, a pair of leopards, and a pack of hounds feared throughout the estate he ruled. Wealth divided people differently in those days. While others struggled simply to survive, he surrounded himself with every symbol of privilege he could afford. He delighted in displaying his fortune, but his cruelty was even more extravagant. The people who worked his land were paid barely enough to survive. They labored from dawn until nightfall and were fed scraps that would have shamed even the keeper of his hunting dogs. And yet, they remained. They knew better than to ask him for an increase in wages. However, one night, one of the groundskeeper's wives was in labor. He requested a night off, and the nobleman hesitantly let him go. The midwife, who was called, was shocked when she found out that the baby was in breech. She urged the man to take his wife to a proper hospital. The man needed a bullock cart to transport his wife to the hospital. The rain was heavy that night, and it lashed against the mansion of the nobleman's estate. The worker showed up at the gate with his wife, who was in labor, and shouted for the nobleman. The nobleman, as well as the staff, showed up at the gate. "What do you want?" asked the nobleman. "Please, sir, my wife needs to go to the hospital. She is in need of immediate medical attention. Please, sir, let me borrow your bullock cart." "Are you going to drag her to the hospital in this dreadful rain?" "You must be mad," said the nobleman. "Please, sir, I have no choice. I need the help of your bullock cart. I promise, sir, I will return it to you in the morning." The nobleman laughed. "You'll return it to me after letting her ride on it? I wouldn't want anyone to touch it after that. Sir, please, I beg of you." The nobleman responded, "Okay, I'll let you have it. Come in and take it." The worker fell on his knees and thanked his master, and proceeded to enter into the grounds to collect his cart. He wheeled the cart out, carried his wife, and placed her in the cart. Just as he was doing this, the nobleman released his hounds. The animals charged toward the cart before anyone could react. The worker threw himself forward, but it was too late. His wife's screams echoed through the estate as the hounds descended upon her. No one dared to move. By the time the animals were called away, she was barely alive. The nobleman didn't look away. He watched with quiet satisfaction, as though the suffering before him was no more than an evening's entertainment. At that moment, every person on the estate saw the man that he had always been, as if he wanted them all to see the power he wielded. The worker's wife, barely alive, took one last look at the nobleman and said, "I curse you. I curse you and your family legacy, your sons-in-law, and their heirs after them will never live long enough to see any wealth. You and your legacy will burn in hell for all eternity." And then she collapsed. The nobleman listened to her with bulging eyes. He just muttered, "The lady thinks she's a witch. She thinks she can predict my future legacy. I'm a nobleman, and my legacy is my fortune." Now, whether this was a coincidence or the dying words of a desperate woman, Every generation of my family grew up believing that night had changed our future. And one by one, we have seen the sons in our family dying young. Every kind of fluke accident, disease, or financial deprivation that could befall the next few generations occurred exactly as she had predicted. It took generations before those dying words found their way to my branch of the family. By then, we were no longer noblemen. We were ordinary people scattered across different countries, carrying little more than an old story and the name of the man who started it all. Whether the curse was real or whether every generation simply learned to fear it, I honestly don't know. Most of my cousins are women. Many have been widowed. Others have seen their marriages quietly come apart. Whether that is the curse, coincidence, or simply the weight of life, I cannot say. What I do know is that my family changed. We stopped believing that wealth was measured by what we owned. We tried instead to measure it by what we could give away. Perhaps it won't undo what one man set in motion all those generations ago. But if there's any inheritance worth leaving behind, I would rather it be kindness than fear. In parts of Laos, there is an old belief about the lake where the ashes of the dead are scattered. People say the water keeps the spirits close to the living, so grief does not carry them too far away. It is a place for remembering, not for entering. This is a story about a man who forgot that. He lived in a small village with his wife and young son. They had agreed without much discussion that one child was enough. The truth was, he was no longer attracted to his wife. When they had first met, she was beautiful, and other men in the village had envied him for her. But over the years, she had grown quiet and tired, worn down by the weight of the house and the child, and the long days alone. She had let herself go, and somewhere in that slow change, his love for her had gone quiet too. He worked in construction, building houses and sometimes grand structures like monasteries and temples in villages far from his own. He liked being away. It was not that he hated his family, he simply felt nothing pulled him back to them anymore. The work, hard as it was, gave him more comfort than his own home did. One day, while he was away, a man from his village came to find him. He informed him that his son was dead. The boy had been playing near an old bridge. He had slipped, fallen into the water below, and drowned. The man returned home as fast as he could. He arrived in time for the funeral. His wife's cries could be heard through the whole village that day, long and broken, the kind of sound that does not stop even after the body is gone. They scattered the boy's ashes into the lake the way it was always done, so his spirit would stay close. The man stayed on afterward, meaning to be there for her. But his wife had already withdrawn somewhere he could not follow. She stopped eating. She stopped crying. She simply went silent and spent long hours at the window, staring out at the plains as if she were waiting for their son to come walking back across them. He did not know how to reach her. He was grieving too. It was his only child, his only heir. He could not bring himself to raise the subject of maybe trying again. So instead, he decided they needed time apart. I may need to go away for 4 to 6 months, he told her. When I come back, I will stay at least a year. She did not turn from the window. He packed his bags and left. He finished the job he was working on, then took on another. building a monastery, far enough away to keep him gone a long while. He told himself this distance could give him time to heal. But he was also thinking of something else. If he found another woman, a new wife, perhaps some happiness could return to his house. It would mean leaving his wife behind. And he turned the idea over for a long time, unable to decide. He could move to another village and start again. But people would call him a coward for abandoning a grieving woman, and word would follow him. He decided it was safer to go home and face her directly. Whatever was left between them, it wasn't love, it was duty, held together only by the memory of their son. Perhaps, he thought, she could find herself a widower in the village and move on the way he meant to. Once 6 months had passed, he had the conversation fully rehearsed in his head. He pictured her anger, her tears, the neighbors gathering at the sound of it. He told himself he was ready for whatever happened when he said it out loud. He reached the village and walked up to his house. Standing on the porch, waiting for him, was his wife. He stared at her for a long time, unable to place what had changed. She had lost weight. She wore a pink and white robe, and a large lotus flower sat in her hair. Her face was done with care, her hair pinned up. The grey, ash-like look that had covered her the day he left was gone completely. She looked, if anything, like a new bride. "I was expecting you," she said, and laughed softly. He stood there almost embarrassed by his own plans. He had spent the last 6 months scheming and rehearsing how to leave her. And here she was, healed, glowing, and glad to see him. That night, she cooked for him, and they talked for hours. She told him that she had taken up praying and long walks through the forest, and that something out there had helped let her go of her grief. She said she convinced herself that she still had him to look forward to, her loving husband coming home to her. That night felt like their wedding night all over again. In the morning, over breakfast, she was the one who brought it up. "Now that you're back," she said, "I think we should try again." They smiled at each other like two teenagers. He decided to stay this time. He even found work closer to the village, so he could be home for dinner every night. For a while, everything was good. Then one night, he woke up to his wife slipping quietly out of bed. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Go back to sleep," she said. He turned over. A few minutes later, he heard the front door open and close. He found that to be very odd at this time in the night. Curious, he put on a robe and followed her into the dark, keeping his distance. She walked straight to the lake, the same lake where their son's ashes had been scattered. Without pausing, she stripped off her clothes and stepped into the water. He could not understand. That lake was only for the dead. No one swam there. No one drank from it. It was not a place the living used at all. He watched from the trees as she came back up out of the water. And then her body began to come apart. Her skin slid loose from her arms like wet cloth. Her eyes sank inward, hollow, and the water around her turned dark and thick with rot. Piece by piece, she came undone in the moonlight until there was nothing left of her at all. But the water did not go still. Something else moved beneath it, slower, deliberate, as if it were trying on a shape the way a person tries on clothes in front of a mirror. turning this way and that, deciding what fit. When it rose again, it was wearing her face, but younger, softer, lighter than she had been even as a bride. It was every version of her he had ever wished for, folded into one. He did not know that yet. He only knew that whatever had just come out of the water was not the woman who had just gone in. He didn't scream. He wanted to, but his throat had closed up completely. He backed away on his hands through the mud, got to his feet, and ran for the house. He bolted the door behind him and stood there, breathing hard, trying to understand what he had just watched. His wife's body just dissolved into the water like something that already was dead. He was talking to himself now. This village is cursed. I have to leave. He was still gathering his things when he turned toward the bedroom and found his wife standing in it. Everything all right? She asked. How did you? He could barely speak. I saw you. Your face, it. Oh, darling, I only went to fetch water for your bath in the morning. She smiled gently. You must have had a bad dream. I saw you in the lake. I saw you come apart. Come sit, she said, as if he hadn't spoken at all. Let me make you some tea. She turned toward the stove and began to hum to herself while she set water to boil. The sound was low and even, like something she had done every night of her life. He watched her for a long time. Then he sat. He drank the tea, and by the time it was finished, so was a memory of what he had seen at the lake. He drank tea every night after that, and every night life felt a little more normal than it had the previous evening. He never saw her slip out of the lake again. But then, he never really watched for it either. He had already decided what he wanted to believe. And it, gave him no reason to believe otherwise. Because that was the thing he never understood. Not once. Not even at the very end. The woman standing in front of him every morning was never simply his wife, healed and returned. She was every version of his wife he had ever privately wished for, younger than her years, endlessly warm, never tired, never grieving, never asking anything of him he did not already want to give. She laughed exactly when he needed her to. She forgave him for a betrayal she had no memory of, because she had never actually lived through it. He had spent 6 months rehearsing how to leave a woman he no longer loved. He came home instead to a woman built piece by piece out of every reason he had once loved her, reassembled by something that had watched him long enough to know exactly what he wanted, and had simply decided to become it. He got everything he had wished for. He only never noticed that his real wife had not survived the wish. What he did not notice, not at first, was that something in him had begun to go quiet too. It started small. He would reach for his son's name and find for a breath that it wasn't there. He would stand at his workbench mid-task and forget which piece came next, though his hands had done the same work for 20 years. Neighbors greeted him by name in the street, and there were moments, brief and cold, when the sound of his own name meant nothing to him at all. He told himself it was grief arriving late. He told himself a great many things, sitting across from her each night, drinking what she gave him. She never seemed to age. He did. Piece by piece, as she had once come apart in the water, he began coming apart too. Only there was no one left to watch it happen. Only her, humming at the stove, refilling his cup before he had even asked. Then one morning, he woke up to an empty house. Her side of the sleeping mat was cold. The tea bowl sat clean and dry on the stove, as though it had not been used in a long while. Though he could have sworn that she just made a cup only the night before. He searched the house. He searched the yard. Out of habit more than hope. He walked the edge of the lake. The water lay still. Nothing about it looked as though anything had ever risen from it. He stood there for a long time, trying to picture her face, and found he could no longer hold on to a single version of it. Every time he reached for it, it slid into another, younger, older, smiling, grieving, as if he had loved a dozen different women and could no longer say which one had been real. He never found her. He grew old in that village, quiet and forgetful, the kind of man people learn to speak to gently because he no longer always answered to his own name. And when he finally died, the neighbors said that he had faded, the same way some old men do, long before their bodies agree to follow. And somewhere, in some other village, a woman is already rising out of a still, dark lake, wearing a stranger's grief like second skin, already learning the sound of his voice, already deciding exactly what he wants her to be, waiting for him to come home. In East Java, there are old stories that do not begin with monsters. They begin with longing. The land itself seems to hold on to these stories. In the quiet hours before dawn, before the rice fields wake up and the villages stir, people say the old kingdoms are not really gone. Their names still live in temple carvings, in broken palace walls, and in the wayang plays still performed on certain nights when a dalang sits behind a screen and gives every character, king, servant, demon, prince, his own voice, one at a time, until the story is finished and every puppet is returned to its box. One of these old stories is about Prince Panji. Prince Panji was not remembered as a great warrior or a conqueror. He was remembered as a gentle prince, well mannered, the kind of man the old royal courts admired. In the stories, he loses the woman he is meant to marry, and much of his tale is about searching for her through disguise, through long journeys, through bad luck that never seems to end. Over time, people began to see his story as a story about loyalty, about never giving up. But in some villages, they tell it differently. They do not say Panji was only searching for a bride. They say he was searching for someone to finish telling his story. In a village near the old temples of eastern Java, there lived a man named Veera. He was a wood carver, a quiet man who spent his days shaping doors, window frames, and small shrine ornaments for houses that still followed the old ways. He lived with his wife and young daughter in a small home at the edge of the paddy fields. He worked hard. He came home before dark, and he did not believe in ghosts or rarely spoke of them. That changed when he was asked to repair an old pavilion on the grounds of a crumbling estate. The pavilion had once belonged to a family who claimed their ancestors served in the royal court. There were some in the village who said that they used to hold a wayang troupe of their own, who were invited to perform for important occasions. Now the pavilion stood forgotten at the edge of the village, half covered by roots and vines. The roof had caved in. The floorboards had warped. The carved wooden panels had turned black with age. Veera was told to repair it carefully without changing any of the old patterns. He agreed at once. The pay was good and the work suited him. It was on the third day that he found it. Hidden behind one of the wooden panels, wrapped in cloth that had almost rotted away, was a wayang kulit, a flat figure cut from buffalo hide, its edges carved into fine lace like patterns, its face and headdress touched with gold leaf gone dull with age. The horn rod that ran through its body was smooth from handling. The thinner rods that moved its arms were still intact, still hinged, as though someone had cared for it once. The face was Panji's, thin, elegant, painted in the calm, downcast manner reserved for the most refined characters. Never open mouthed, never anguished, no matter what happened to them in the story. That night, he brought the puppet home. He set it upright in his workroom the way he'd seen the Langs do once as a boy. The horn rod driven into the block of scrap wood so it stood on its own, facing the room. He planned to return it in the morning and tell the estate's owner what he had found. Before dawn, his daughter woke him crying. She said a man had been standing at the end of her bed. He was dressed like a prince, she said, but his face was blurry, as if the little oil lamp in her room could not decide where to shine. He did not speak. He only stood there, watching her sleep. Veera searched the house, but found nothing. He told himself she had only dreamed it. But the next night, his wife woke to the sound of footsteps crossing the yard. When she looked outside, she saw a tall, still figure standing beyond the kitchen wall, facing the rice fields. He wore a headcloth, the kind worn in the old royal courts. She called out. The figure turned its head just slightly and then stepped into the dark. By morning, there were footprints in the mud outside the kitchen, but only one set, coming but never going. Veera looked exhausted that week, though he swore he'd slept. After that, small things kept happening. Veera would leave the puppet standing in his workroom before bed, and in the morning would find it somewhere else entirely, leaning in the doorway or seated against the wall of the front room, its thin arms bent in a gesture he did not recognize. Once an arm was raised, palm out, the way a character in a play holds up a hand to stop someone from leaving. Another morning, both arms hung low and turned inward, folded almost against its own chest, like a mourner's posture. At first he thought it was his daughter playing tricks. She swore she hadn't touched it. In fact, she said she was afraid of it. He began locking the workroom door at night. The puppet kept moving anyway. He had no explanation for it, and after the first few mornings, he stopped looking for one. It was easier to simply lock the workroom door at night and tell himself that was enough. The footprints kept returning too. They crossed the courtyard and stopped at the door of the workroom, the room where the puppet stood on its little wooden block. No one ever saw who made them. No one ever heard a door open or a gate creak. But every morning, the tracks were there again, always fresh, always damp, as though someone had just walked in from the river. Veera decided he had seen enough. He carried the puppet back to the pavilion and set it down exactly where he had found it, driving its rod into the same gap behind the panel. The house stayed quiet for 3 nights. On the 4th night, his daughter disappeared from her bed. The front door was locked. The windows were latched from the inside. And yet, near the back door, Veera found a thin trail of wet, dark earth leading out into the yard. Though he could not remember unlocking that door, could not remember anything at all between lying down beside his wife and waking to her screaming their daughter's name. He could not explain any of it. The locked door, the trail of earth, the hours he could not account for, and with his wife's screams still tearing through the house, there was no time left to try. He and his wife searched everywhere. They woke the neighbors. They checked the river bank, the wells, the rice fields, the road leading out of the village. The night stretched on and their lamps burned low. At dawn, they found the child sitting quietly inside the old pavilion. She was pale, she was shaking, but she wasn't hurt. When they asked who had brought her there, she said the prince had led her by the hand. She said that this time he had not looked like a man. He had looked like someone searching for something. And for a little while, she said he had looked at her as if she might be it. Veera held his daughter and said nothing. His wife only said that he looked more tired than she'd ever seen him. After that night, Veera could not work in peace. His tools would go missing. They would turn up in strange places. A chisel inside a water jar, a hammer resting on the roof beam. Panels he had already finished would show new lines carved into the wood by morning, delicate, patient lines, the kind that took a steady hand and a long, unhurried night to make. He recognized that the style was very familiar to his own work. Then one afternoon, while repairing an inner beam, Veera found a seal compartment cut into the wood. Inside was a bundle of old cloth, a broken banana log stand, and a curled strip of lonta leaf, its script faded but still legible in places. It described a performance held at the estate generations ago, a full night's telling of Panji's search, meant to run until dawn, as such performances always did, so that every character could be walked properly back to rest. The Dalang had died partway through, some illness, sudden and unexplained, taking him in the middle of a scene. The play was never finished. The leaf said that Panji was never returned to the box. Veera brought the leaf straight to the village elder. The old man read it in silence. Then he told Veera 3 things. Burn nothing, touch nothing, and go back to the pavilion before the sun went down. But by then, it was already too late. That evening, something entered the old estate. It did not come with wind or thunder or any of the sounds people expect from a haunting. It came quietly, the way cold water rises around your feet before you notice that you are standing in it. A heaviness settled in first, in the chest, in the back of the throat, the kind of feeling that makes you want to sit down without knowing why. Then the smell changed. The air, which had smelled of rain and wet leaves all evening, turned still and flat, almost like the smell of an empty, unused room that had been shut for years. Veera felt it move through the hallways. Then slowly they began to see it. Shapes. They came from the pavilion, from the yard, from the trees beyond the rice fields. Veera and his wife stood at the threshold of the house and watched shapes moving in the dark, figures in old coat clothing, walking the same slow path over and over, as if tracing a stage that no longer existed. None of them spoke. None of them turned to look at the living. For a long moment, nothing else happened. The figures simply walked around the pavilion, past the broken steps, along the edge of the old walls, again and again and again. The way a scene is rehearsed by people who were never told it was allowed to end. Veera's wife did not move, and neither did he. They only watched because there was nothing else left to do. Then, at last, his daughter began to cry, and the sound of it seemed to break whatever quiet that had been holding the night together. Only then, one by one, did they turn back toward the trees, as if the sound of her crying didn't belong anywhere in their story, and hearing it was enough to send them back. By morning, the pavilion stood empty. Footprints were gone. The carved panels sat untouched, as if nothing had ever happened. For a while, Veera let himself believe it was over. He went back to his ordinary work. He slept mostly without incident. His daughter stopped walking in the night. His wife stopped checking the yard before bed. But some mornings, he still woke with mud between his toes, though he had gone to sleep clean. Some mornings, his hands ached, the particular ache of a long night's careful carving, though he could not account for the hours. 3 weeks after the night the figures walked, his wife woke to an empty bed. She found him in their daughter's room. He was standing over the sleeping child, perfectly still, one arm raised at the wrist, fingers curled as though something ran between them that wasn't there. In his other hand, hanging loose at his side, was the puppet, the one he had sworn twice now to leave behind at the pavilion. His head was tilted abnormally. His mouth was moving, but no sound came out that she could name as words. Only a low, even murmur, patient and formal, the cadence of someone accustomed to being listened to. She said his name once. He did not answer. She said it again, louder this time, and crossed the room and took hold of his raised arm, and Veera suddenly came back into his own body. The puppet slipped from his hand and fell to the floor. Their daughter woke up crying. Veera stood in the middle of that room, his wife's hand still locked around his wrist, his daughter sobbing into her blanket, and looked down at his own hand, still curled into the exact shape it would take to hold a control rod, though there was nothing gripping it now. He understood it all at once, the way you understand a fall only after you've already landed. He had been the one doing the haunting all along, the entire time, with hands that had never once stopped being his own. That same day, he sent his wife and daughter to stay with her sister in the next village, telling them that only it wasn't safe for them to remain, that he would follow once things are settled in the estate. He did not explain any further. His wife searched his face for a long moment before she agreed to go. That night, Veera walked to the pavilion alone. He found the puppet exactly where he had left it, upright in its gap behind the panel, its painted face turned toward the door as if it had been waiting for him specifically. He gathered dry brush from around the old walls, piled it against the beams he himself had spent weeks repairing, and set it alight with the same lamp he had carried into the pavilion on the very first day. The old wood took quickly. The fire climbed the walls he had so carefully restored, found the dry thatch off the roof, and did not stop. Veera was never seen in the village again. By the time the neighbors noticed the light in the sky and came running back with buckets that would do no good, the pavilion was already beyond saving. It burned through the night and into the grey hour before dawn. And when the last of it collapsed in on itself, there was nothing left to sift through but ash, and the blackened remains of a wooden block that had once held something upright. When the estate's owners finally came to see the wreckage, they called it exactly what it looked like from where they stood: a careless man's fire, a burnt contract, a hired carver who'd either died in his own negligence or run rather than face what he had done. No one suggested otherwise, and just like that, the search for Veera ceased. His wife waited for a man who never showed up or passed any sort of explanation for his departure. As the legend goes, a story does not end just because the stage burns down. It only waits again, patiently, for the next pair of hands careful enough to pick up where it left off. And that is a warning still carried in the legend of Prince Panji, in the villages that tell it differently. It is not a story about a ghost who haunts a house. It is a story about a performance that was never allowed to finish, and about how easily a story like that can borrow the hands of someone who only ever wanted to do good, careful work, and calls that borrowing nothing more than a long night's sleep.